this last month that's ending today as much as September and August of last year.
Wow, that's amazing.
It's been crazy. So like yesterday was like our like 8th or 9th highest day of production. Not yesterday. The day before. It was like the highest, like the 8th or 9th highest day of production completely. So sorry about that. My YouTube just clicked in. But yeah, it's been bananas how sunny and nice it's been.
Very cool.
It's not often I actually have an actual metric to go with it to say that, yes, it's been even sunnier than normal. So
well, I like it.
I just saw the HDC overrule the Board of Selectmen overrule the HDC on a solar panel on Eagle Point Road.
Really? So they denied the approval?
Yeah, I think we should probably avoid talking about other regulatory decisions as our meeting is beginning.
Okie dokie.
Yeah. All right, I'm gonna start reading our script and hopefully our other members will be coming on shortly. As a preliminary matter, this is Ashley Erisman, Chair of the Nantucket Conservation Commission. Permit me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Mark Beal.
Here.
Seth Engelborg.
Here.
Erisman is here. Ian Golding.
Here.
Maureen Phillips.
Here.
We're waiting on Dave LaFleur and Joe Topham. Staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Jeff Carlson.
here.
Anticipated speakers on the agenda, please respond in the affirmative. RJ Turcott.
Here.
Ray DaCosta.
Here.
Okay. Good afternoon. This open meeting of the Nantucket Conservation Commission is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the COVID-19 virus, we have been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings, and as such, the governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order, which you can find posted with the agenda materials for this meeting, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will feature public comment. For this meeting, the Nantucket Conservation Commission is convening by video conference via Zoom app, as posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that all attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that other folks may be able to see you and to take care not to screen share your computer. Anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. All supporting materials that have been provided members of this body are available on the town's website unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless I note otherwise. We are now turning to the first item on the agenda. Before we do so, permit me to cover some ground rules for effective and clear conduct of our business and to ensure accurate meeting minutes. I will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude their remarks, the chair will go down the line of members, inviting each by name to provide any comments, questions, or motions. Please hold until your name is called. Further, please remember to mute your phone or computer when you are not speaking. Please remember to speak clearly and in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. For any response, please wait until the chair yields the floor to you and state your name before speaking. If members wish to engage in a conversation with other members, please do so through the chair, taking care to identify yourself. And with for items with public comment, after members have spoken, the chair will afford public comment as follows. Staff will activate the chat feature on YouTube. Members of the public who have comments or questions can use this feature to communicate with the public body. Instructions are on the town's website. And the chair and/or staff will do their best to address questions and comments. Finally, each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by roll call vote. So with that, we will open the meeting with public comment. Jeff, do we have any public comment at this point?
Yes, just give me 1 second. I got to scroll back up. So Burton Balkind has a comment. It concerns me that Steve Cohen said that the mitigation sand in front of the geotubes was a red herring. I'm asking the board and or staff, is there no condition that states mitigation sand must cover the geotubes? This was said during the 2019 reporting review of SPPF projects. I kind of responded just on YouTube that I'll send him the specific conditions and the specific condition reference that covers that specific issue, because I just don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but have that document that I can mark up and send to him that discusses those things.
Thank
And then
you.
he had a question about the pond opening for hummock for next week, and I just answered that on chat as well.
Okay, thank you. Oh, looks like I have the wrong agenda up. Bear with me a second.
We've just had too many meetings in the last week, so.
We have. Give me a second. All right, so we have, oh, how do I have the wrong one up again? Sorry, everybody.
All right, so Mr. Topham is not going to be joining us this evening because he is not feeling well. So.
Okay. That is too bad. I hope he feels better soon. So I think I did have the right agenda up. We have order of conditions for Nantucket Land Bank.
Yes, I emailed this out just before the meeting. Sorry, Madam Chair. This is the project that we closed last Thursday, and we had talked about putting this on just because our agendas have been kind of long. This was the, I always say it wrong, Otteson or Otison property, where the land bank is moving the house away from the edge of the creeks and moving it towards the edge of Orange Street. I kind of reviewed the minutes. I didn't see anything specifically to condition. I know since we're kind of moving in and around the flood zone there, I put a condition that no fill was permitted, but I didn't really have a whole lot else to add in.
Okay. Let me just get to my mail.
If it's easier, I can share my screen if people.
I've got it up now. I don't know what other commissioners feel like. Ray, do you have a question?
Yeah, sorry. I was just, how do I find the, I guess, agenda or?
So that, go ahead, Jeff.
If you go to the town website, Ray, if you go to where it says agendas and minutes and click on that, and then just scroll down to the Concom, and you'll see two links for tonight. One is just to the agenda, and then the second one is to the materials for the meeting.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
So does anybody have any ideas about the land bank, or are we okay with the way it's drafted? Or is there a motion to approve as drafted? So I saw Mark's hand go up first, but you're muted, and then Maureen second. So Mark, did you want to make that motion?
I so move. Sorry, I was muted.
That's okay. And Maureen, I'll give you the second.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, so by roll vote, we have Beal,
Aye.
Engelborg,
Aye.
Erisman, I, Golding,
Aye.
Phillips.
Aye.
All right, that carries unanimously. And then we have certificate of compliance for Fairweather Nominee Trust at 3, 4, and 5 Sheep Pond Road.
All right, this was for a house relocation as it was moving away from a road in Coastal Bank, and the permit wasn't closed out at the time. But the structure has been relocated and is relocated in compliance with its original permit, and we would recommend the issuing of the certificate of compliance.
Thank you, Jeff. Are there any ongoing conditions or just as is?
Just as is.
Okay. Mark, were you making the motion?
No, I was asking, was that in our packet for draft orders?
No, it's up in the packet for the meeting.
It was or was not?
It was. It's at the
Okay.
top. If you go to like where the normal package, you'll see
Okay,
one
I
that's
just
just
got-
labeled.
Okay, I was reading the land bank packet just now.
So many packets.
Yeah, I think we have had a lot of paperwork coming through the last week, so easy to get confused. It was at the beginning of the regulatory amendments packet.
Gotcha.
Maureen?
Yeah, I have a question. It's pretty amazing to see the site plan from last September where now the 100-foot is now at their deck and advancing more forward. I mean, does that impact at all what, obviously the move, this is still just going back to what they did so long ago. And so the fact that current conditions have changed so much, is there any necessity to reflect any of that at all? I just wasn't sure because
Sure.
they're teetering now on the 100. So
The easy answer to that question is if they were applying for new work, yes. And the plan they filed has a located top of bank from last fall. For
mhm.
certificate of compliance, where it's showing that house being constructed or relocated into the originally permitted area, I think we still felt it was sufficient, but if they were proposing to do anything additional, obviously,
Okay.
updated resource area boundaries would be required.
All right, just as it seemed so odd that it's obviously conditions have changed very rapidly in that area. So thanks, Jeff.
Yeah, thank you, Maureen. And that's, I think, maybe in regulatory updates, we can address some of these changing conditions on coastal properties in some way. Seth?
I'll move to issue.
Awesome. So motion made by Seth. Is there a second? Seconded by Mark. So by roll vote, Beal,
Aye.
Engelborg,
Aye.
Arisman, I, Golding,
Aye.
Phillips.
Aye.
Right, that carries unanimously. And that moves us on in the public hearing under notices of intent, amendment of the Town of Nantucket Conservation Commission Wetland Protection Regulations. I know in our packet we had some information that we went over previously, and then we have some newer submissions, I believe from the Land Council, and we have new information about the hydraulic dredging and some of the fisheries information. So Jeff, as far as organizing for you, where's the easiest place for us to start?
Wherever you guys would like. I don't know if I know Ray is here to speak on as a member of the public on the hydraulic dredging and mobile gear kind of discussion. I know we'd also sent that link out to Tobias and to Pete as well, Pete Kaiser. I don't know if they're going to make it or not. I was anticipating that Tobias would, maybe Ray knows. But if he's here, you might just want to do that one first, and then he can go on his way and not have to wait.
Yeah, so that sounds good. We'll go to Ray, and then Jeff, maybe you can update us on some of the questions we had for George about our regulations updates before we get into kind of the details. Ray, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, so thank you guys for taking the time to talk about this. It's really appreciated by myself and many of the other fishermen who I've spoken to. I did talk to Tobias and Pete today. Tobias said he should be with us here momentarily. I'm not sure about Pete. He's a little iffy on the technology side, but I know he does want to be here, so hopefully he'll figure it out. I'm not sure where to start. I can answer, any questions. just a question for the board. How aware how aware is the board in terms of what hydraulic dredging actually is and its damages along with mobile gear? What we're kind of talking about there, like when we say mobile gear, what we mean, and then also the effects of it. And then the last question I would have, just so I have an understanding of where the board is at, is does the board understand Nantucket and Nantucket Sound specifically in terms of what type of bottom we have here, and then what type of ecosystem that bottom entails?
So those are great questions, Ray. I think our knowledge would vary depending on the individual. I have to teach fishery science, so I know what those different gear types are and the impacts of them and overfishing, et cetera. Other members might not be as aware, and I think we have a general knowledge of the land under the ocean, but not necessarily maybe the differences in some areas. Like we would know that eelgrass grows in kind of our harbor areas where we're not as worried about, that type of habitat off of our south shore. So it definitely varies, and any expertise you could, bring would be great.
Okay. I don't, go ahead, Jeff.
I was just going to say, I think it may be helpful, Ray, if you just gave them kind of a 2-minute summary on the different gear types that cause an impact and what those impacts are. And then maybe just a really brief kind of summary about how they impact the different habitats around the island. Because I know there's a difference between impact to cobble and shifting sands and those kinds of things. Just to kind of get everybody on a level playing field a little bit. Not to put you on the spot.
And I know Ian had his hand up. If he had a question, I just want to make sure he gets that out before you start.
I'll defer to Ray. I think I have a general knowledge. I've fished off the Sankaty for decades in my center console, and I think I have a lot to learn. And more specifically, I'd like to see pictures of the damage that they've actually done in New Jersey. And I think that would be a great help going forward to actually see evidence of the damage that they've done. I mean, from the point of view of making regulations, I think it should be evidence-based.
Yeah, and I know if you guys, I know you went to the State House together. If there was like a presentation or something you put together, like any information you had, I think would be good for the commission to have to review, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I understand. All right, so I'll give a brief summary of recent years and how we've kind of come to this point. The fisheries that we're talking about, hydraulic dredging, which is targeting sea clams, which are abundant in our area. The way that's done is they're pumping water down into the sand. It basically blows the sand up. There's a dredge that comes behind that, scoops the clams up. The problem with that fishery is it moves your water depth. So if you take a foot away and then do another pass, take a foot away, you're making it deeper, which in turn allows a larger amount of force as a wave comes towards the island to inhibit erosion. That's one of the concerns that we have. Where was it passed, Jeff? In P-Town? Yeah, so in P-Town it was passed for that reason. The main concern that I have is with just fishing and regulation of our bottom. Our bottom is extremely important when it comes to squid. Squid come to Nantucket Sound and to the backside of the island as well to spawn. They lay egg mops in the sand, as opposed to striped bass or other fish where they spray their eggs The males come by, spray the eggs with sperm, and then the eggs float along in the water column. Squid anchor their squid mops to the bottom. And as you get into these shallower areas, which inside of 3 miles in Nantucket, we don't have anything that's over 100 feet. Most of the sound is 30 to 40 feet of water. Same with the backside of the island. And as you drag along, you're ripping up squid mops. That's my biggest concern. So basically what we're doing is we're killing something before it has the ability to reproduce, because once that squid mop is unanchored from the sea floor, it dies. And if you walk along in the early spring when the squid fishery starts, you will find the squid mops that have washed up on shore. They look like they're jello-y and they have long bags almost coming off them. You'll find them up and down the South Shore and along the east side of the island as well. The biggest concern that I also have is we've gone to the state for, I think we've been working on this now for 5 years. The government, in my experience, is extremely slow with making regulation. You're talking about moving a fishery that has extreme weight in the government and can just put lobbyists in front of us, whereas we're just a couple fishermen who see the impacts on a regular basis. The state doesn't do any studies like this, and that's how we've been getting pushed back in the state level. Is they just keep basically telling us, oh, let's do a study, oh, let's do a study, oh, let's do a study. This is not what we're basically asking for here is something that 95% of towns in Massachusetts have. We are the last one to the table here. And we're seeing this pressure come from not just boats in Massachusetts. We have boats coming here from as deep as New Jersey, all the way up. Last year off the backside of Nantucket, we took roughly 12 million pounds of squid from our waters. I mean, we are the last spot that doesn't have this protection. And to us, we would have went and done this earlier if we had realized that we could have. Pete is the one who kind of stumbled across, and he knows 1,000 times more than this. I mean, it's almost incredible to me how much time Pete has dedicated in his life to fighting these things. And trying to, make the fishery sustainable for myself, because I'll be the next generation to come after them to use these waters. When you look at overall, we fought the herring fisheries for 20 years in the Massachusetts State House. It was finally enacted last year. Pete and my dad and a couple others finally got it through. It took the scientists to finally come forward to the government and say that the herring stocks were at a 90% loss plus for them to enact it. We're fighting against, big regulation. And with the letter that we got from Vineyard Wind, it shows, and through the P-Town organization, it shows that we have the ability to limit what is done to our bottom. So that's pretty much why I'm here. And like I said, Pete can talk much more, and I think he's actually on here now, as to what these, different types of trawls do, the difference between hydraulic dredging and mobile gear, and then the effects on our bottom.
Thank you, Ray, for that summary. Definitely very helpful. And we do have Pete on now. I don't know how much he heard of what you said. But Pete, if you would like to speak and add anything about the different gear types, how they damage the habitat, changes you've noticed to our habitats with the increased pressure from boats coming from other places. We'd be happy to get any information from you.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, sorry for that. I just walked in the door here. My daughter Katie got it ready for me. So Yeah, I just heard a little bit at the end of Ray. I think we spoke a lot of this last week. And are you just looking for any additional things that we talked about, or?
Yeah, we're trying to essentially catch the commission up and get everybody on the same page as far as their understanding of the issue, its impact to the different underwater habitats on Nantucket, and just, I guess, the impact of the different gear types.
Okay, I actually this week I'll be putting something together. Some of the habitat down off Sconset that I get hired to do the survey work that the Sconset, the SFPF, that they're required to do. So I get to, when we're towing these transects, I get to actually see first-handedly as it's being recorded, and I have to do that so I can tell if we're got to go a little slower, a little faster. But I mean, it is just absolutely beautiful. It should be a national monument when it's down there. And so it really spurred my interest in a lot of other people when we started seeing this. So I'm going to get some sample clips out to you guys this week. But anyway, that being said, the thing that goes against the grain is that, again, 95% of all the coastal municipalities have by right this protection of, it's like June 1st to like October 31st, that they have no mobile gear. And again, when they say mobile gear, that's gear types that interact with the bottom, which is hydraulic sea clamming, bottom dragging, and also sea scalloping. Now, by like right as an example, the town years ago set up the regulation of how many dredges you can tow at one time, the weights of those dredges, and the reasons why was so that they didn't uproot all the eelgrass and destroy it. So anyway, we've already done this exercise. But that being said, all these other coastal communities have the protection, and us in the backside of the vineyard are the only ones that don't. So again, let me just recap that the people that were most vocal when it came up for a vote at the state were the people from Gloucester, Boston, and New Bedford. And the thing is, if you look at this map, those three places have year-round protection from this gear, from these mobile gear types. So their habitat is undisturbed. I mean, it's, you know, that's what you want to do, especially at this day and age. The more we're learning and the more the science is coming forward. I mean, again, my class of people, you know, as far as the age goes, we're just trying to protect it for you guys. And the thing is, it's gone a long ways as far as destruction goes. There's not a lot of places left that these guys are going to. And Nantucket, these waters around here, if they find anything, it was beaten hard enough back in 2016 with all the squid boats and stuff. But what we saw with the presence of the sea clammers on that south shore, if you think you saw erosion before, if they get in there and start beating up that bottom, especially that outer bar, but you know, you're right, you grew up right there in Cisco. If they take that outer bar away, your parents will have waterfront property. So, and again, so it's great to see Ray and some other younger people. And in fact, that's what some of the governmental people told me, that we need to get the young people to step up to the plate and again, just become good stewards of what's there. That's what everybody else is doing. I don't know if Ray mentioned it, but there's a film that just came out. I watched it the other night. Seaspiracy. It's on Netflix. Or no, it's on YouTube. Anyway, Seaspiracy, and it is it's a great film. It brings it from the old days up to nowadays, and it shows what kind of percentage of fish are left compared to what there used to be, the habitats. I mean, it really seals it up. But anyway, I just, again, was having kids your age, granddaughter now. I just feel like we need to step up. And again, as Ray stated, that the windmill people, they know the law. And they realize that we, or you on the Concom, have the right and the ability to limit what kind of activities take place out to 3 miles, no deeper than 80 feet. So I think when you see this stuff that's off Sconset, I mean, we looked there because of 2 reasons. One, when they first were going to do a beach nourishment plan, we thought we better go out and see what's there because we don't want to cover anything up. And that's the first time we took the cameras out there and seen how beautiful it was. And so from then on, I mean, it's just absolutely gorgeous. And the fact is, just east of here, right, the state waters go out to 3 miles. Then you have what exists now is a 2-mile slot. And then going east of that for 20 miles. They just implemented that last year as a habitat management area, which basically bans, that's a huge area, especially when it goes from Chatham, the tip of Monomoy, to about 15 miles south of Nantucket. And that area is a habitat management area. There is no bottom dragging, no sea scalloping, no sea clamming, hydraulic sea clamming. So they found the importance, and it is some beautiful bottom. I have videos of that out there too. So again, I'll leave it at that. And if anybody has questions, let it happen.
Thank
I
you.
do.
I
Madam
think
Chair?
yes, I think it would be definitely helpful, Pete, if you could submit pictures of that pristine bottom compared with pictures of what it looks like after some of these dredges have gone through. I think that would definitely be helpful. I know Ian has a question, and then Ray had a comment to make.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So, Pete, did I understand you correctly when you said that P-Town, New Bedford, and what was the other town?
No, it's Gloucester, Boston,
actually
and New
opposed,
Bedford.
and they opposed your suggestion?
Yeah, when we were trying to get it, we had the 2 at the town meeting twice. I think it was twice in a row, or maybe one every other year. That it was an unbinding vote at town meeting, and it was basically a unanimous vote that everybody in Nantucket, we were asking for the same protection.
Thank you. So
what would happen is when it went to the vote at the commission, the state commission, unfortunately, that commission is stacked with commercial, and a lot of them are draggers. And again, we've got no issue about commercial fishing, but at this point in time, the damage has been done in such great all around us, and this is some of the only bottom left.
No, I thank you. So my next, if I may, Madam Chair, I've got 2 more points I'd like to make on that specific issue. I'd like to go through you to Jeff Carlson.
Yeah.
And Jeff, why can't town council go to bat on their behalf and on town's behalf with this sort of obstructionism? It's absurd that towns that actually already have this protection are trying to deny it to other towns.
So I will 100% agree to you. I will unfortunately say that state politics are a little different than local politics. And is all things fishing at the State House kind of run through. And this is just my experience. And I think Ray and Pete will agree with me a little bit. A lot of the fishing interests kind of hub through Gloucester and New Bedford at the State House. And anytime that you're impacting any fishery that they operate, they come out to oppose it. And I don't think it's necessarily a case of town council going. I'm not sure that, I think town council could do a fine job in helping, but I honestly think from my experience and what I've seen, you would probably need more of a professional lobbyist to go and do that in place of town council. But I think this local option
corollary would be to put forward a bill that strips them of their protection and then see how they try to handle that. But anyway, so my other question is to Ray. Ray, you said there were 12 million pounds of squid were taken last year. Did I understand you correctly?
Pete will know the exact figures. The worst year we saw out here, and this is what originally sparked the squid conversation. They took around, I want to say 19 million pounds of squid in a 5 by 10 mile area off the backside of the island. If you look at the maps, which I'm sure Pete can get you the density maps of where the fishing is, these fishermen come from Jersey to above us, maybe into Rhode Island. They come to the back of the island in between the middle of Nantucket. If you drew a line from the middle of Nantucket to the middle of Martha's Vineyard, and they drag back and forth across in between the breaks of the islands. And if you look, the way the squid migrate, they come right through us and the vineyard in between Muskeget and Tuckernut. And it is a bottleneck out there. And they use that bottleneck just like a funnel into their nets. The pressure that we see on the backside of Nantucket is like nothing on the East Coast. And again, this regulation, if the board does decide to pass this, this will not stop commercial fishing. That's not what Pete, myself, anyone from the island fisheries is here for. All we're doing is trying to limit what happens inside 3 miles to give those squid a chance to, when they do make it past the boats, that they can lay their mops successfully and reproduce. And then also, Pete, if you can just give a quick summary to the board of how a hydraulic dredging operation works and what it does to the bottom, because from what you've always told me, the bottom only is living for 8 inches, I believe. And how deep does a hydraulic dredge go down into the bottom?
Pete, do you want to take that one? You're muted.
So, Madam Chair, I do have a follow-up observation on what Ray had to say after Pete has spoken.
Okay. And then we'll go to you, Mark, 'cause you got your hand up.
Maybe you're right. I don't remember having those sharp ones though.
Should I speak?
Yeah, you should. Yep.
Okay. So again, what happens, a hydraulic dredge, when it goes through, they use them off at George's Bank. The majority of the boats were down in New Jersey, in that area. That was a major mother lode. And in the last 5 years, they've showed up here because they basically fished it out. Nobody thought they could ever do, just like the codfish. We never thought we could fish out the codfish. But that gear type has basically fished out all of Jersey. So now they're here. When they drag that dredge through the bottom, what happens is the bottom is called the benthic community, the very bottom. And if you go down 6 inches, 6 to 8 inches, there's oxygen. And you have crabs, you have worms, you have sand eels that burrow in there. You have things that grow. That basically 6 to 8 inches at the bottom, that's the benthic community. Now, unfortunately, when a hydraulic sea clamor goes through, they leave a trench about 6 to 8 inches deep. I mean, it's gone. Everything that lived in there, it's just obliterated up in the, because on the front of the dredge, again, they have a black hose that you'll see it hanging off the side of a boat, the big black hose, which is driven by a big diesel. And you have high pressured jets in front of that dredge, basically pointing straight down, emulsifying the whole bottom, just 6 to 8 inches deep. And that's where the clams live. So as they tow that dredge along, there's a knife in the front of it that they slide up, and some of them are just airborne and they just end up in the cage. Again, it's the way they get the most of them. But at this point in time, I think there needs to be some areas set aside. And the fact that all these other coastal communities have the protection, there is absolutely no reason why we shouldn't. And we've been up to the hill, we've had legislation brewing through the senator there. And the first time around, it just got shot down, as Jeff was saying, heavy politics were involved. But again, we're taking another bite at the apple. But we, again, becoming aware that last year, when the windmill people contacted us, yourselves, Jeff, it made us aware that we do have standing about what activities take place in Nantucket municipal waters. And even the state sent a letter making us aware that that was going to happen. So it was like a wake-up call. We're going down the line of fisheries, but what we really need to do is go down the line of land under the water, which is the habitat. If you don't have the habitat, you're not going to have the bait. You're not going to have the bait that comes to spawn, which brings on the next size fish, which brings on the next. You look at the whales that we've seen in recent years. That's pretty exciting. You know, I mean, there's nothing more than a live ocean. And again, if we don't set up some kind of parameters and at least request what's going on in Gloucester, Boston, you know, New Bedford, we're not asking for anything real out of the picture. So.
All right. So listen, Madam Chair, if I may, just one final observation to
Yep.
both Pete and Ray. Look, we're all on the same page here. So when I asked Ray that question, I was thinking, you know, how come there isn't a marine biologist who would go with you if you didn't have one to say how damaging this would be in terms of that huge amount of catch? You know, what is that as a percentage? I don't see how it could possibly be sustainable. But I mean, this is from someone who knows almost nothing about the subject. So from my point of view, I'd like to go forward as quickly as possible. And that's, of course, where Jeff and Town Council come in. Thank you, Madam Chair. I will be quiet from now on.
Yeah, and can everybody mute if they're not speaking? I've got a lot of background noise happening. Yeah, so I do, you know, wonder if Ray and Pete have looked at the P-Town regulations, because I think that's really what we have to go on at this point. I know I am, you know, happy to essentially, you know, copy and paste those regulations as ours in our regulations update. You know, I'm sure other commissioners, you know, probably feel the same way. So I think we, you know, will hopefully move forward on this. Mark, you had a question, and then Seth, I'll go to you.
Thank you, Ashley. Yes. I'm unsure of the authority we have. You mentioned going to the state and mentioned we have control of land under the ocean out to 3 miles. So what's the difference there? Is the state pick up after 3 miles? Do we have control over everything within 3 miles? Or
So
does the state get?
I think as far as our process, going to the state would be a separate issue from us adding regulation to our bylaw. So we can technically have say over land under the ocean up to 3 miles off of the coast. So we can regulate that as a local conservation commission. And I think that would be our goal here today. So anything that would happen at the state level is, again, outside of our process.
And that would be outside 3 miles then.
The state, I think, still is looking at within 3 miles of our coastline, but maybe Jeff can speak to that.
I'll actually probably default to Pete on this because he understands the boundaries much better. But the state's jurisdiction for managing fisheries kind of extends to 3 miles, and then it turns to federal outside of that. But I'll let Pete clarify that because he, again, has the best grasp as the county's fisheries representative on that.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so again, state waters only reaches out to 3 miles. Beyond that, it's federal. Now, and again, we're not looking as much as the fisheries part of it. We're looking at the habitat. That's what we're looking at. There's a difference between looking at the natural resources and the habitat or the fisheries. We went to the fisheries people before, and it was like, found out we were barking up the wrong tree. It's what it is. It's the fisheries gear type that destroys that habitat. And so we have decided, look, at this point in time, through the Concom and, you know, these bylaws that we're aware of, in fact, to give you an example, not only P-Town, but last year, when we got that letter from the windmill people, what happened was Eggertown also got a message from the windmill people, and they were going to run the cable up through there. Edgartown Concom objected and found out they had a whole lot of standing. They took the windmill people to court. They said, we're not going to allow this. And the windmill people got all flustered and up in a roar. They had to go to court. And they finally, through the governor, I guess, stepped in a little bit and talked them into some kind of mitigation in case they did it and caused any damage. But we do have standing. And again, Edgartown stepping up to the plate and say, you want to make one pass through here? We're not going to allow that. Meanwhile, we're in a situation where these boats can come in and not make one pass. They can make hundreds of passes, totally rip it apart. So again, we do have standing.
I have a follow-up, Ashley, if I may.
Thank you, Pete. Yes, Mark, go ahead.
So Pete, are you looking for us to help you with lobbying in the State House? Or are you looking for us to do regulations or looking for both?
No, so we can't lobby at the State House, so we
No.
need to just update our regulations. That's our
We-
only path.
You just step up to the plate and say Nantucket is going to make some regulations, local regulations through the Concom. And we are going to allow commercial fishing, but there's only certain gear types that are allowed to participate. And if you have a gear type that's going to be, have a negative impact on the bottom and the benthic community, we're probably not going to allow it. And that's how it goes. I mean, we really, after these last year of getting the letters from the state and the letter from the windmill people, they are saying to us, you have the right to object to this. So again, we never knew about this. We never knew we had such standing. And it's not in a negative way. Again, to be, in the history books, I hate to see it go back and say, well, yeah, they tried to do something, but they were unsuccessful. Therefore, they weren't good stewards of the ocean and the habitat. I mean, I don't want my name written on that list. So let's do all we can do to step up to the plate. It won't be an easy road, but again, we can do it.
Thank you, Pete. I know Seth has a hand up, and then Maureen, I'll go to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm definitely for moving forward with this regulatory update. I think what we need from you is pragmatic information. So if any of your representatives have had a chance to review that Provincetown bylaw amendment, if you could let us know if you think that language is sufficient or if there needs to be any local differences added, because obviously Nantucket and Provincetown isn't the exact same place, not the exact same habitat. So I think it's a good starting point, but if we need local information added, letting us know what that is, and also exactly what you're looking for, whether you're looking for a seasonal gear closure, an annual prohibition, and just the specific types of gear. I know we've mentioned hydraulic dredging and mobile gear, but there's a variety of mobile gear types. So we just need a list. We just need like a specific list of what you're trying to achieve, so that we can write the regulations.
We need to try that. How would we do chicken though?
Yeah, we're looking. I'll get a map to you guys that shows. It's a color-coded map that shows what municipalities have what protection and for what times a year. And again, you'll see Gloucester, New Bedford, and Boston. They highlight those places have 12-month closure on any mobile gear. And again, it lists mobile gear of gear that interacts with the bottom and has a negative impact. I mean, it's black and white. It's there. And it goes back when, I know back in the 80s when we were fishing up off P-Town, we were tuna fishing and we were getting a lot of bait from the draggers and everything was good. There were a lot of fish around back then, a lot of big fish, little fish, all kinds of fish. And it was kind of weird. We had some discussions, some of the guys, we were all like, well, this is cool. We're using it for bait to catch big tuna fish. But, most of this bait we're getting is very small, undersized, anywhere from lobsters to codfish to flounder. It was pretty wild. But we thought, well, the state knows better. Otherwise, they'd shut it down. Well, since then, they've shut it down. They've learned and watched everything, be depleted. So that being said, again, we're not against commercial fishing, but we should not allow the gear types. This could be, we could be right at a tipping point. The damage that was done in 2016 and all those boats that were in here, it could be at a tipping point right now. So all I'm saying is that we go forward, and it's probably for the same reasons that Gloucester, Boston, and New Bedford have shut their waters down. That's all we're seeking, to be good stewards. And again, it's you guys and all the island people. We are in charge of the activities that take place. And that's all it is.
Thank you, Pete. So I do want to focus on Seth's question on really the specifics, because we are with you here. So we want to get these regulations in place. I think a 12-month prohibition on the gear type that damaged the bottom is where we need to go, because if it damages the bottom, that's permanent. So I think that we are definitely with you, but really having you guys review that language for specifics would be really important. I know a lot of hands have gone up. Jeff, I'll go to you, and then Maureen had a question for a while.
So if it's helpful for people, I know in the pack, and I'll send it to Pete Ray and Tobias as well separately. We've already kind of taken P-Towns and adapted a little bit to Nantucket and changed it around, and that was included in tonight's pack as one of the separate items. So I can send that to them for any comments. I know that's something that's already been kind of vetted through town council as well. So I think that's a good start, and I think if these guys could provide a little bit more information for you guys that you've asked, I think we're at a really good starting point and are pretty well down the path.
Thank you, Jeff. Maureen, you had a question or comment?
Yes, some of this has been said, but I just wanted to kind of lay it out, and agreeing with my fellow commissioners so far that we are, I join in them in support of this habitat protection, and that looking at the Provincetown rules, what we need in order for us to have regulations that will withstand any challenge, we need to have findings in those regulations that are supported by science. And so, and that's really what Ashley is talking about, that, the maps, the data you all have, all of that would allow us then as a commission to make the findings that are mentioned, in the Provincetown regs about the importance of, just trying to find a piece of it, but it's hydraulic dredging is dangerous for the habitat. That's not quite what it says, but so these statements would then, so you need to have the statement, you need to have the science behind it, and then the specific parts of your regs that would include 12 months ban and the rest of it. But obviously it is all looked at as habitat. And so we get away from lobbying. This is under our jurisdiction. And really the most important thing, I think, is to have those findings supported so that we can put in as broadly based a regulation as we can, because that's what we're looking at. I just have one clarifying question. I think I know the answer to this, and it goes to a lot of what Peter, what you were saying, or I guess actually all you were all saying, the fact that there's these, many, many millions of pounds of squid being taken in our waters is because essentially we've left these squid unprotected, and people have, the squid fishermen have moved from where they are prevented from going. And right now we haven't prevented them. They are not protected by what we can do as a town. And so that's why all those guys are gathering there. And if once these regulations come into place, then there would I assume there would be at least a significant, or there would be some reduction of habitat destruction. And so that's, if the last thing I just said is right, that's great. But I think really we just need more facts and maps and photographs from you all that will, we just need a record to support what we want to do. And that's, I think you've got our support. So thank you.
Thank you, Maureen. Tobias?
I just wanted to echo what one sentiment that Maureen expressed, and I think is very important. And I think everybody's had a great discussion today. It's about in the experience with Provincetown, with some of these draggers, there was a bit of a conflict and there was some appeals made. And so I'd really encourage the Concom to engage with Greg Corbo. He works with Kopelman and Page, and he did write the regulations for Concom. And I believe Kopelman and Page is the town's attorney as well. I'm not an attorney. I'm not good at writing regulations. And so I think that might be very helpful, bringing someone in who has experience writing these regulations already in an adjacent town. Myself, Ray, and Pete, we can provide more information, but I think when it comes down to really crafting regulations, it's good to turn to the lawyers who have expertise in this field. So just wanted to say thank you all for listening, and I look forward to sharing more information and educating all the commissioners as well. But thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Tobias. And all our regulatory updates will go through town council, so they definitely will look at all of this to make sure it will stand appeals, etc. Seth, I saw your hand up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The only other information that I think would be helpful from the representatives here in terms of the fishing community is I would hate for these regulations to be reactive only, because I know through my experience as a scientist in other parts of the world, when some types of commercial fishing activities are banned, there are cases where people will take up alternative methods that may be just as damaging or potentially even more damaging. So if you are aware of alternative methods for these same species that already exist that you want us to be concerned about, let us know now so we could think about potentially protecting those as well.
Thank you, Seth. That's a great point. Ray had his hand up, and then Tobias.
Tobias can go first. Go ahead, Tobias.
Yeah, so I'll just address that briefly. Alternative would be a hook and line only for the squid fishery specifically. I toured a number of boats in South Africa, as well as a squid processing facility. It is illegal to fish a small mesh in South Africa. In a questionably third world country, using small mesh, it's that destructive. And so they have recognized that only using a jig fishery, where you have people pulling up on a rod catching squid, is the only acceptable alternative. So there are other scenarios out there, and also in the EU, in the Mediterranean, it's a jig only fishery.
Thank you, Tobias. Ray, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so one thing I was just wondering, will it help if we show any documented evidence of the types of bycatch that these squid fisheries will get? Whether it be like, I have a video of them catching about a 15-foot great white shark in the net. I have videos of them catching everything from striped bass to bluefish to scup. Basically, they catch every single thing in our environment because, like I said, when they're fishing with these mobile gear types inside the 3 mile line, they're in anywhere from 20 to 60 feet of water, roughly. That net goes from top to bottom. So whatever they drag through, they catch. And also, squid here are our most important bait source. So everything is trying to eat them while they are trying to be caught. So I just want to know if that will be helpful for the board as well.
Yes, that evidence of bycatch would absolutely be helpful for us making our findings. So Any of that you have, you can send to Jeff, and then he can distribute it around to commissioners. So photos, videos, any of that would be very helpful.
Okay.
So thank you. Pete, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, as far as the bycatch, that data, I mean, it's federal data that when these boats are fishing out here, again, we only have out to 3 miles. Beyond that, as everybody had witnessed in the last 4 or 5 years, the last couple, not as much, because we believe they put such a hurting on those squid mops. And again, there was a meeting in Rhode Island we went to, and we listened to this lady who was the scientist for squid. And she started to say to everybody that during the spawning season, when the squid are spawning, they aggregate, they do this dance, they impregnate each other, you know, the males, the females. And then immediately the females go right to the bottom, and they have this gelatinous material that they secrete into the bottom. And then they pop out these plugs. It looks like a squid tube. And that's where you get about 10, 15, 20 of those all stuck to this mass. And that's why they call it a squid mop. And she went ahead and told everybody, much of all of us, I don't think any of us hardly knew it. She said that those squid mops need to be attached to the bottom for 17 to 30 days without being disturbed. If they're disturbed or uprooted from the bottom, they go on the tides, and they pretty much about 100% mortality. Now, when she, with everybody, even us, that we were amazed, all the dragonmen were amazed. Nobody really realized that whole fact. But that's the procedure. So when all these squid over here aggregate to spawn, they put those mops in the bottom. If you uproot them, pretty much 100% mortality. And that's fact. And again, the bycatch rates on the federal observer program is about 35% dead mortality bycatch. That's every other species. I mean, anyway, it's called an indiscriminate harvesting method. So, okay.
Thank you, Pete, for that information. It's definitely very helpful. And I just want to make sure that when we do our update, we do include all of these different harmful gear types. As Seth said, that we're encompassing kind of anything that can be habitat damaging or that has a lot of bycatch associated with it. We want it all included this time around because if we don't get it, it could be a while before we do regulations updates again. So I think we have definitely a lot to work with. Maureen?
Yeah, I'd just like to add that when we do the reg, the kind of thing we'd want to do is to use the general term, which I think, Peter, you were just saying it's indiscriminate catching, so like anything that would result in indiscriminate catch, or whatever the right phrase is, including, and then we would list all the things that we know, mobile gear, all these things, but it's including but not limited to. So that gives, we want to make sure that we have some kind of a signpost there that we're ready to, prohibit anything anything that somebody cooks up that's going to have that impact. So I think that's that everything you've said tonight will be very, very helpful. And also, I just think that, frankly, the video of this meeting is going to be helpful to the record as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Maureen. Are there any kind of final thoughts or questions from commissioners on this issue? Ian? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry. Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question for both Pete and Ray. So how do these communities enforce their regulations once they're in force?
Pete?
Yeah. I mean, the word gets passed around, and they know in all these other cities, they know what the limitations are because it's been there forever, for, I don't know, 20, 30 years. So what they would do is pass that along the Department of Marine Fisheries, the state fisheries. We could have that would go out in a bulletin. They have a monthly bulletin, the monthly meeting, and it would definitely come up for discussion at their meetings. And as far as enforcement goes, if you could have, the harbor master, a lot of times the harbor master will jump on board with the Coast Guard if it feels like there's a lot of repetitive damage being done. They go out there. I mean, right now, so many of the people that are fishing around here, recreational charter boats, they don't have, it's no problem taking a picture and calling up, either the Coast Guard or calling up the town. So some of the boats, it's kind of strange. About 5 years ago, they mandated that any commercial activity over 65 feet, any boats over 65, would have to have an AIS, which was the automatic information system. And it shows you the location. Now, since then, I was at some of the federal meetings. Since then, I don't know how they're sidestepping it, but they're like, oh no, it doesn't, we're okay. We don't need to have it. But that, I don't know. I'm going to find more out about that. Because if that's the case, and we can get it mandated that they have to have their AIS on, if you're fishing inside 3 miles, then it's there's basically, giving this information that they're guilty of fishing in there.
That says 64 feet,
60
11 inches.
It was 65 feet or larger.
Yeah. I mean,
So there's
if
smaller
boats are
boats.
64, 11 inches.
Right. Oh,
then
believe
perhaps
me.
it should be specified,
But
it
again,
doesn't matter what the length is.
yeah,
Guys,
that was go
one
ahead.
at a time. And I want to make sure we're kind of staying on track. I think,
Yep.
we would
Sorry,
ban
Madam
these gear types, and then it would probably be a combination of, boaters out on the water, reporting other boaters, using Jeff's office, Coast Guard, and Harbor Master to try and regulate and enforce. It would have to be really a combination of those things. And as far as the AIS, that's not something that we can really control, although it's a tool, I guess, in identifying some of these boats.
Right. The thing about the AIS, a lot of them, they go out 3 miles, on these drones. And these drones you can have them rigged up with lat long, time of day, day and year. And I mean, this could be something that's actually operated from shore.
Mhm.
You see the boat out there, either the town, the Natural Resource Department has it, or just, I mean, there's some local residents that have it. Ray's got one that you could be on the beach. If a guy, like recently, we're seeing people within a mile of the beach, you could send that drone up. There it is, lat long, date, time, bingo.
Yeah, thank you.
And then there would also have to be, we'd have to investigate what, so if you get caught, if you say, well, you're going to get $100 fine,
Yeah, so
they
we'll have
go,
to deal
that's the
with,
price of admission. That's
we'll have to
nothing.
deal with the fining later, Pete. That's a major issue for us too. So right now we should just focus on getting the regulation on
Yep.
paper.
Yep.
And I think that's really all we can really do today here. And
Yep.
then dealing with enforcement, monetary fines is kind of another issue we're kind of tracking. Ray?
Yeah, if I can, just so to try and put everyone's mind at ease here. It is a challenge to try and figure out how to basically figure out if a boat's inside the 3 mile line, so on and so forth. But this map on my phone, if you can see this is a density map. This is what tracks all the boats that fish. When they're fishing, they have to turn this system on. This is their AIS. And you can see in red, the red area is the highest traveled route. So that's the squid fleet on the backside of the island right here. That's how much they rake back and forth. So you can track these through a variety of different websites online. It wouldn't be as complex as it may sound.
Thank you. Any other kind of final thoughts or comments on this? And then I think we'll look for more information from you guys as far as bycatch, some of the video evidence and photography for our findings. And then just looking over the Provincetown draft that we might use as far as adding Nantucket specific information would be very helpful. Ray?
Would scientific, like Pete was talking about, the woman who spoke about the squid mob, she's a squid researcher, would having them draft a letter too explaining the importance, that be helpful?
Absolutely. That's like the perfect evidence for our findings. Yes.
Okay, great.
Yeah, thank you. Any other comments or questions about the regulating land under the ocean? Okay, it looks like no. Jeff, did we have any comments from the public on this one?
We did. Burton just had a question about, he was confused whether it was about squid or hydraulic clamming or both. And I think the simple answer is the discussion is more about damage to the land under the ocean habitat, regardless of whether it's for squid or for clamming. It's just that potential fishing methods are causing damage to the underwater habitat.
Yes, I would agree with that. Pete?
You're muted, Pete.
I'm not sure what your relationship is with the vineyard, but they went through the process of saying no to dredging that cable underneath there. So they know the program. They know how to object. They know what kind of things they're gonna run into. But it was pretty amazing to see that they had the standing to shut that down. So I think if we could contact the people from the Eggertown Concom and find out some details, I mean, I think we might get a lot of insight from them.
Thank you for that suggestion, Pete. I know Jeff is in contact regularly with other kind of commission staff. I don't know, Jeff, if you have any insight into regulations they might have that would be helpful to us.
So they just denied the order of, they issued a negative order of conditions for that project. But I could definitely speak to the agent there. I know them and can get their information, probably that final order as well.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, I want to thank, I know Tobias has dropped off, but Pete and Ray for coming and explaining this issue in more detail for us. And I know I look forward to getting more information to help us draft our findings to move forward and work with you guys. So thank you.
Thank you all.
I think one last thing is that I got it turned on to it from Tobias, but that Seaspiracy, that movie it's an eye opener. It'll talk a lot about the destruction of habitat and the, overfishing, the indiscriminate harvesting. It'll be an eye opener for you. So I recommend if you can watch that.
Thank you, Pete. I did notice that one come across my Netflix recently. All right, so thank you guys for coming. We will definitely have further discussion on this topic as we work through the regulations update. And hopefully we will see you guys again.
Yes, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everybody.
No problem. I'll be sure to let you guys know of that date when that's going to come up again as well.
Okay, thank you, Jeff.
Jeff, I don't know if you can maybe update us on where we were with some of the town council issues with our last kind of regulatory update. I know a lot of questions needed to kind of go through town council.
Sorry about that, guys. We just had our maintenance crew come into the office, so I had to grab my mask. So kind of where we left off last time, I know we had sent around a proposal that showed kind of an updated and proposed finding structure that we had sent to everybody. We got that back from town council, and unfortunately town council said that is not a legal approach to be able to do that because it runs afoul of the non-criminal disposition statute. So trying to do it even through a set penalty, a set penalty where you assess by something like square footage doesn't work that way. So he encouraged us as a bit of a workaround to perhaps look at it as having some sort of filing fee structure to deal with it differently as well, because we do have the ability to set filing fees. So I think if you were to set filing fees that addressed it in a similar fashion, so if someone came in for a notice of intent to do restoration work, that you would essentially create kind of how the state act works, where there's a category system for whatever you would go through. And then one of the categories at the end, could be like a category 7, after the fact, or after the fact restoration required. And then you could charge similar to how they charge for things like coastal banks, where you could charge by the linear foot or you could charge by the square foot and set a rate as a filing fee. So you would essentially still be getting that fine without a ticket, because you'd be requiring that filing fee as part of an application. If that makes sense to people.
It does make sense. I just wonder, do we have examples on how to structure that better for us? I know other commissions have higher filing fees. And I'm just wondering what we have to work with. And then my other question, in cases where we have somebody in violation, but they're not planning on filing with us, so it's like perpetual violations that they're not coming in to address. If they never file an application, then how do we get at the fining in that case?
So I think in that case, the way to approach it then is to have a set penalty. So you would just set a penalty to say something to the degree of, failure to respond to an enforcement action would result in a $300 per day fine until the applicant responds in front of the commission. And then it's just up to us to issue a fine every daily fines. We usually do it in like the chunk of a week. So you would just send out one ticket, but you just need to have that set penalty. Right now, our set penalty defaults to the set penalty that the select board has set through. I think it's the administrative procedures of the code. So it'd be chapter 1. You would simply set that to say in the regulations, it's a $300 per day penalty. And then it's just simply that. So you would get your enforcement action. If you don't respond by the deadline, you would get a ticket for $300. And then if the action after the fact is that you are requiring a filing to fix something, then you would be subject to the penalty for whatever you'd be trying to fix. Or you'd be paying a higher fee to file that application.
Thank you for that. Do any commissioners have questions for Jeff on that issue? Maureen?
Jeff, in our package was a copy of Barnstable's fee schedules, which seemed to be tracking what you were suggesting. And when I looked at them, and I was like, oh, this looks great. I mean, it's got the categories and all of that. So is that, would we be looking at something that's a lot like that? That's on page 12 of our packet and goes on for a couple pages? I mean, is that the way we would go? That's town council.
Yeah, so I included the Barnstable one as a good concept because the state act works. I know not everyone here has had the wonderful pleasure of filing one of these before. The state act works where you when you pay your fee that's determined, they group activities by category. So, category 1 is just usually like simple site work, right? We're going to install the board fence. We're going to put in a pool. We're going to have an addition. That's like a category 1, and that has the lowest fee, and it kind of ramps up from there. So Barnstable has structured their fees in a very similar fashion, and they actually match pretty closely to there. And then what they have done is for after the fact filings is they charge double. So if it was going to be $200 and you did it without a permit is now you're going to pay $400. So I've seen and heard of some commissions that go as high as 5 or even 10 times on a fee. But I think that's a little bit up to the commission. I mean, I think, getting at it in a sense of after the fact, like to compare it to, I think an after the fact filing for something like 36 Pocomo, not to kick dirt on 36 Pocomo, where they cut down a bunch of wetland vegetation, they did destruction to the wetland, they did destruction to the buffer zone, is a different kind of after the fact filing than, say, the project we just did as that amended order for Harborview Way, where they extended their deck to connect another deck to another deck, just in the flood zone, where it's, I think sorting that difference out between what those violations and categories would be, I think is something that we'll have to flesh out a little bit through there, because not all after the facts are equal.
Right, they're not all equal, which could be somewhat problematic for us.
Yeah, I mean, some of those activities, again, not to go back to Harborview Way, but if that activity for Harborview Way had come in on an original permit application, it was meeting performance standards and probably would have been permissible in the first round, where the work that happened at somewhere like 36 Pocomo clearly would not have been permissible. And therein lies kind of the rub with using filing fees for after the fact work or enforcement kind of work. Or you could have two schedules that are different. I mean, you could have an after the fact and then an enforcement schedule as well.
Yeah, I think that would be good to have the after the fact and then the enforcement portion that would cover kind of the more egregious wetland violations that we see. Seth, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I was going to say that same thing, that if after the fact approvals are coming in proactively where the representatives realize they made a mistake, I still support charging double because it's logistically more challenging for us. But in terms of enforcement, where we've had to issue actions or staff has had to take extra time to deal with that, I would support 3 or 4 or even 5 times that same fee, because just the extremity of what actually happened.
Yeah, I would agree with you there on the higher fees, especially given the violations we have on Nantucket, and unfortunately the wealth that gets weighed in making these decisions. I think we need a filing fee that's high enough to really discourage the behavior. So I would agree with a higher monetary fine or fee, for filing for the enforcements. Ian?
So through you, Madam Chair. So Jeff, you're really saying we have no discretion, which really sort of surprises me.
Could you clarify the bit discretion in
Yes, in other
what
words,
way?
for the situation that Ashley referred to, where it's an egregious violation, why can't we just state that it's discretionary, at our discretion whether or not we fine up to 5 or 10 times? Because ultimately that's what we do anyway.
Well, I think what you would do, Ian, is I think the problem with discretionary, and I think this is why the non-criminal disposition code is written this way, is they try to get away from, and I know this sounds like a really bad excuse, but this is always how state law seems to work, is they try to move away from, that guy's my buddy, so I'm going to give him the lesser, and I don't like that guy, I'm going to give him the greater. And it's the same thing, right? So they try to always eliminate that ambiguity. And I think that's why the way our current regulations in the bylaw is written, where it says the commission may issue up to, is it gives you that discretion, but then you run afoul of that law and it doesn't become valid because it's not a set penalty. So I think you'd have to spell it out a little bit, and the commission may be able to decide if it's right. So he's my my two examples again. If the commission would have noticed, or if staff would have noticed, what had happened at Harborview Way wasn't in compliance, or when they issued their certificate of compliance, if we would have issued an enforcement out, again, I think that's something for that after the fact that you guys could say, well, that's an after the fact that will be charged double. If it's a violation for something that doesn't meet performance standards, then you could have the discretion to say, well, this one is 5 times the fee or 10 times the fee. But I think you'd have to establish that fee schedule that says, violations that occur that don't meet the performance standards are filed for restoration at 10 times the fee. I mean, I think you'd have to have, that would be that set penalty to then not run afoul of that provision, but would also clearly establish what that filing fee would be. Because I don't think you want people trying to guess what they should pay.
Good point. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Any other questions on the filing fees versus fining and how we would apply this? Okay. All right, Jeff?
All right, so if everyone is supportive of that concept, probably before our next regulatory meeting, which I don't know if we'll set the date for that tonight for sure, or if we'll set it next Thursday. I think what we'll do is we'll write up kind of a draft of something that we provided, that what Barnstable looks like to have our revised fees. And it's nice to see what they charge, because then you can have comparable, because it's also something where you just can't try to discourage filings by saying a category 1 in Nantucket, if you want to build an addition on your house, our filing fee is $25,000, right? You got to stay kind of within the range of comparable communities, or DEP gets angry with you, and you obviously would have like a citizen revolt. So we'll try to put that together with the categories, and then we'll break it out kind of this same way where they have these things. And kind of, if everyone also is supportive too, Joanne and I are both very interested in what they've listed here for certificate of compliance that they call a redocketing fee. So a revisit. So if we go do a site visit to close out your permit, and we come back and we say, sorry, Harborview Way, you guys have extra work that wasn't included on your permit before. You guys need to amend or modify or deal with that permit. We have to come back out and then re-inspect that. We have they get charged again by saying, I mean, it's kind of another bite out of the apple, but it's really annoying to get certificates of compliance that aren't in compliance. And you go out and you look at it and you say, it's clearly not in compliance. You guys need to fix this before it comes back, to then have to go and do it again. So it would be nice to include some of those provisions too, if everyone's comfortable with that.
Yeah, I think that would be a good one to include, because the time that is spent, or the time that you and Joanne spend like checking on these properties that is just totally lost, I think it would be important to recoup some of that. So I'm in favor of adding that.
Yeah. And then the only other enforcement one that I think we're going to try to ask to add in, now that we unfortunately aren't going to go down the path we've gone before, is this is just more of a pet peeve, especially of Joanne, is would really love to be able to issue a specific penalty and ticket for sites that are in disarray and silt fences aren't installed properly, or silt fences aren't maintained, because we chase a lot of folks with, could you please fix your silt fence? And then when you get to like the third time you're asking people to fix their silt fences, I know it sounds petty, is they're not out of compliance for the work, they're just not keeping their silt fence in the repair it needs to be. I feel like after the first or second time, it'd really be nice to be like, here's a $200 fine because you guys can't keep your silt fence put together. Maybe you'll pay more attention to it now, because it's like the bane of our existence for doing all these site checks.
Yeah, I mean, I think I see a lot of head shakes. Yes, I think we would be in favor of that, because technically they're not in compliance with their permitted conditions when they're not maintaining their silt fence adequately, or have trash blowing out of dumpsters into resource areas and things like that. So
yeah, but it's also something that I don't think it rises to the level, unless it's really bad and really egregious and repetitive that it needs to take up time during an actual scheduled commission meeting to just have a contractor fix their silt fence. It seems to me it'd be much easier just to say, here's your fine. We'll be back tomorrow. If it's not fixed, we're going to fine you again. And eventually you're going to pay attention because you're going to be $1,000 deep. And all you had to do is fix your silt fence. So, and then you guys aren't losing time at meetings, you know, scolding contractors for not doing their silt fence, just issuing tickets.
Jeff, is this because I sent you a picture of a silt fence over the weekend that seemed out of compliance?
No, I mean, I seriously say this is, I would say no short of at least once or twice a week, Joanne or I are calling or emailing somebody to tell them to fix their silt fence. And they've gotten really good about sending star work forms in and things, but it's also silt fences aren't installed entirely correctly, but we spend I don't want to say a lot of time, but it's probably our most regular phone call related to this is to say, your site's a mess, you need to fix your fence. And that's just, I mean, they're flimsy and they break. I totally get it. And I don't think our intention is to, you know, try to make the town $100,000 in silt fence fines. I think it's to be able to say, call them once and say, fix your fence. And then to go check in a couple of days. And if it's still not fixed, to say, well, here's a monetary reminder of our call from 2 days ago. Please fix it. We're going to come check it again in 2 days. And I hope it's fixed. I mean, we get a fair amount of, we get neighbors that send pictures. I mean, we sent one over the weekend. It's the most obvious thing to do. And it's to keep track of. It's super easy. So.
Great. Well, yeah, I think we're all in favor of that. Maureen?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, it's it's like a symptom of whether they're being really careful about following their orders of condition, and whether they, do they really care? Are they on top of it? Is their contractor, is whoever there is on top of it? So it seems to me that, I know this isn't, trying to make a lot of money for the town per se, but the amount, it's not like Joe and Jeff have, oodles of extra time. And so this kind of make work for people who just aren't, it's like they don't get it. I mean, I would think that, the fine should be something that gets people's attention. I mean, obviously, you were talking about that earlier, Ashley. I mean, this is something that we really have a problem with because there's a whole lot of people on this island who would, a fine of $200 a day is, meh. So it's, it's to get compliance. And I just, I guess we really need to make sure we have numbers that will have people paying attention. So.
Yeah. I tell you what, though, you get a contractor that gets their property owner and their permit holder a $200 fine, and they have to explain why the site is a mess and why they're having to pay $200. That conversation, I know it's only $200, but that conversation is not going to be fun for a contractor to have. And it's only going to take a few before people start to really take notice of it.
Yeah.
So, again, not saying that we want to issue a bunch of tickets, but it would be nice to be able to have that as a tool.
No, I would agree. So thank you for mentioning that one as well. Ian?
Yes, why not make it the cube of the size of the property per day, or the square? So a property of 10,000 square feet is triple the fine of a property of 2,000 square feet. I'm not trying to be entirely facetious either,
Unfortunately, that runs into the same problem as the other one. We'd have to have a penalty for it. Sorry, Ian. I know it's the dream, but unfortunately, Massachusetts criminal code doesn't allow for it at this point.
All right.
Massachusetts really is tying our hands here.
Just making you be
Fine
creative.
squad's allowed, huh?
Yeah, we'll figure this out at some point, how to actually get people to pay for the damages to our resource areas. I'm confident we'll figure it out. All right, are there any kind of other questions or comments as far as the filing fees and fining is concerned? All right. So does anybody have any new regulatory updates they want to look at? I know we've already talked about things like patios being regulated as structure and looking at like the runoff that's created by those. We've talked about coastal engineering structures and beefing up our language there. I know dunes and some other resource areas we were looking to get better definitions of. And I just wasn't sure if there were any kind of newer additions from commissioners. Ian?
Well, I am, apart from what's in our packet, if that's, beyond what's in our packet, I didn't see any reference to increasing the undisturbed area between the 25 and 50 foot. I'd like to see that added. And I see Jeff has disappeared on us, but I think it would be a big help to me. Thank you, Jeff. Going forward at some point to have the same thing that we did 10 years ago or 8 years ago was have our regulations with the amendments in a different color so that we can really put it in context.
Yeah, certainly. I was just sorry about that, trying to get a kind of a running list as long as there was some kind of consensus, and then we'll do a track changes version for everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I know one thing, sorry, and then Seth, I'll go to you. I mentioned this a few meetings ago, just having language for coastal properties that, when they have structure that hits that 50 foot mark, that they have to come in before us. And I don't know if that can actually go in our regulations. Like if they're 50 feet from a coastal bank or a coastal dune or beach, like when they hit that, if that could be an automatic kind of trigger in our regulations. Jeff?
So I've put a little thought into that, and I have a little plan of attack that I just wanted, I think, for people, and kind of thinking about it a little on the fly. Is I'm not saying that this would be a new filing or something that would even cause a fee. Is I think you'd have to deal with it as far as probably new construction or have a date kind of set on it at this point, because I don't think you could go back and say, if your house has been there for 80 years, when it comes within 50 feet, you have to do this, because I think there's some difficulty with that. But I do think, especially for new, I know there's the provision that goes in where you can't have a coastal engineering structure, obviously, in some of these. But I do think you would also have the ability to say, if you got within 50 feet, you have to file a retreat or adaptation plan with the commission. And you could put together kind of what the requirements of that would be and what the trigger points would be and have a discussion. So it wouldn't necessarily be kind of a formal filing up front, but it could certainly be something that they then file for discussion. So then they knew what to file for through a notice of intent or through a request for determination. But it would also get them thinking and kind of establishing what kind of performance standards would be appropriate or what kind of actions would be appropriate. But I think that would be an interesting way to kind of attack that issue. And then you could also try to compel people that come into that are an existing building already. It's a friendlier version without costing any money to come in and talk to the commission about what they're going to do.
Thank you, Jeff. I think that's a great idea and a great start in getting this into our regulations. I think that would definitely be a good way to go. Seth, you had your hand up, and then Maureen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have two buffer zone items that I'd like looked at, particularly in the wake of sea level rise and climate change, just trying to be more resilient. The first is identifying a similar percent disturbance number that we have in the 25-foot area to just the 100-foot buffer zone in general. I'm not going to say what I think that number is right now, but just looking at a site-wide buffer zone maximum disturbance as well. And also, I would just like us to extend our, we've been looking at within the 50-foot buffer zone, having projects require native non-cultivar species. I would just like us to extend that to the 100-foot buffer. I think that, a few things came up in my mind, like agricultural plantings. I think those could be exempted, or we could just handle that through the waiver process. But as Nantucket continues to change, having native plantings throughout the whole buffer zone is just gonna be more resilient for the ecosystem and the property itself.
Thank you, Seth, for bringing up the native plants to the 100. I know Ben Shampoo and I used to talk a little bit about that, and I am fully in agreement that we should have it to the 100. We have beautiful native species that can be used, and it won't, detract from the money that landscapers can make. They can still landscape the same amount of plants, but they'll just be sustainable. So thank you for mentioning that one.
Yeah, if I just may, the waiver process still exists. So if people want to build a demonstration garden or agricultural installation or something, and then they can show that there's no adverse effects of that, they can come and prove it, and the burden of proof can be on them. But it's just way better ecologically to require the burden of proof to be on them, rather than trying to nitpick which areas native should be in and which they shouldn't.
Thank you for that, Seth. Maureen and then Mark.
Yeah, I wanted to go back to what Jeff was saying about having this plan for retreat or adaptation. I mean, that's the kind of thing, that whole concept, and getting that out there as something we would be looking for, because that's something they would probably they'd have to spend some money on that. I mean, it really focuses on the fact that this isn't just kind of catch as catch can, and when things get bad, we'll figure out what to do then. Areas that, that would seem ripe for, sea level rise issues or additional erosion. I just think that's a great idea, and I just wanted to support that wholeheartedly, having asking people, to do a plan like that. So, thank you.
Thank you, Maureen. Mark?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I was just agreeing with Seth on the no cultivars and the 100-foot, but I was also looking at the Provincetown regulations, and they're much more strict in the 100-foot zone than we are. They allow no structures within 80 feet, and virtually they start by saying nothing within 100, and then no structures within 80 feet. I just think I've always been sort of surprised that we allow to almost anything goes within 50 to 100, which surprised me. I mean, 50 feet really is not that much, but I would think of the cultivars within the 100 would be a very reasonable amendment to a regulation, or not amendment. It would be a regulation, wouldn't it?
It would be a regulation in our buffer zones. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I like that.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And I agree with you. Whenever I see like the small distance that 50 feet actually is, I'm surprised. So I would agree. I don't know. I think we could probably regulate some activities a little better. I don't know statewide what we would need to fall under. Like I worry about opening us up to tons and tons and tons of appeals. But Jeff, do we have any power to regulate structures to be further back than 50? Or is there like any law out there that's happened with?
I mean, I know different commissions have had different standards over time for structures, but it is something, as long as you're tying it to the impacts that you're trying to protect and the interests you're trying to protect, if you feel that it needs to be farther away, I mean, you guys could certainly try to pursue that. I don't think there's anything that says it could only be 50. I mean, I know the state act is, down to 25, and, like Mark brought up, some of the commissions are as far as 80. I'm not necessarily sure that you could say it has to be all structures outside of 100, but that may be possible. I don't know, but I do think there may be a way to shift that around a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, definitely the development pressure our wetland resource areas are under on Nantucket is greater than other communities experience. And the collective impact, I think, is probably worse than we realize right now. So I would definitely be up for looking into moving structures further back. Seth, you had your hand up, and then Mark.
So did I.
Ian.
Oh, sorry, Ian.
Ian, you can go. You were first.
Yeah.
Age for beauty. So, no, I totally agree. I'd like to see it back. I don't know if Jeff has the history at all. But you made a reference to the state regulation of 25 feet. What were you referring to specifically?
The state CMR, the 310 CMR, I don't remember the second numbers off the top of my head, but I can find it. But they have their buffer zones are typically one buffer zone less restrictive than our buffer zones. That's a really nice round way of saying
that. Would it be worth asking town council for an opinion as to whether we could increase it, considering the pressure that the remaining wetlands are under? I would have thought it would be a reasonable request. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ian. Jeff?
Just to answer that question, I think the easier way, Ian, would be just to draft what we think the regulation would look like and just have them review those regulations.
So Seth, and then Mark, and then Maureen had her hand up.
Thank you. I'm in support of examining moving structures farther away from resource areas. I do think that there needs to be a new definition or some discussion of like primary versus ancillary structures. And I don't know necessarily if those are the right terms, and I'll let the town council decide what goes in which. But I do think that some structures that are absolutely critical for site development I'd be more willing to see them closer if need be. Other structures that are nice but aren't really required for living, I would prefer to see them farther away. So if we could maybe consider a split amendment that identified, here's are the things that could be at this distance, and here are the things that need to be at some other distance.
Thank you, Seth. I think that's a great idea, because some of our sites are very small, so that might allow them to still have a house, but maybe not allow them to squeeze a pool or a guest house in there too. So thank you for that idea. Mark?
No, I was just going to say, I mean, beginning with patios would be a good start for, within 25 to 50. That to me is I've been very uncomfortable with building patios because they just provide drainage. Now, I almost don't care how well you design it. I think it's still going to run off in the wrong direction probably on a good, healthy rainstorm type thing.
Thank you for that, Mark. I think hopefully we're going to identify patios as structural in this regulatory update, at least the majority of them. I think that's the way we were seeming to lean in our last discussion, which will hopefully help that. But I don't know. I'm getting a little bit of head shakes, so I think that that's what other commissioners were leaning towards too. But I'm in agreement there. Maureen?
Totally.
Yeah, I wanted to mention that I think what Seth was trying to get at is her primary and secondary. It's the usual terminology. But I think there's a couple of things, again, we need to have some kind of reason, for doing any of this, as opposed to just simply being arbitrary. And obviously, for properties that are subject to sea level rise, I think, we have a pretty strong case for limiting the, because there's so much clear scientific evidence of the impact that will have. So limiting structures that are subject to erosion, I think would be, that's one thing. And just in general, thinking about when we see what other jurisdictions have done, to see again what they have put together as their the rationale for making something more strict, or what it might be, and the you always, regulations are always stronger. The better record you have, the more data you have, all of that. I mean, I know we all know that, but it's, and we all have a sense of what we wish where we wish we had more power, to limit development. But we have getting to the specifics. And again, and I know, and Jeff has been doing a great job with this, looking at other jurisdictions, and what they have done. So I strongly think we should have sea level rise, property subject to sea level rise. And then we've got that gives us, I think, a lot more reason to be more limiting. And then think about what we can do for properties that, that are not coastal. So thanks.
Thank you, Maureen. I've always been curious, and I don't know that we have this data over time, but even inland wetlands with increased flooding and rainstorms are likely to probably grow out as well. And I am curious locally if we have any data that shows that. I know we have some properties that, were seen 20 years ago, and now the wetland buffers are further out. That's partially because we weren't using soils at one point. But to really see how those wetlands are changing over time would be helpful for the inland regulation. Seth, you had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And, my understanding is that the regulations are written to be resource area specific. So if we had concerns about one resource area versus the other, we could have different structural distances or different rules, in any of those resource areas, as long as it was tied to a performance standard and a protected interest. I think that some level of specificity about the resource areas that are more subject to those activities would be good.
Thank you, Seth. So Jeff, do you need us to talk about any specific regulatory update in more detail to help with a new draft? Because I don't think you were present at our last regulatory update. Am I remembering that correctly?
Sadly, that is correct, but I have had the fun of watching it a couple times. It was great entertainment. I think at least my hopes from tonight was just to kind of get back on track and go over the stuff that was there and kind of myself get caught up and then take on a couple new issues that had come up. But I think I'm pretty clear, and I think it's important for people to remember too with a lot of these things, right? Like, Seth kind of hit the nail on the head, is you have to be able to tie the impact related to how it impacts the interest protected for each resource area. So, if you want to say that, patios increase surface runoff, which gets to some of the water protection issues and things that are there, that may be applicable to, bordering vegetated wetlands, may be applicable to salt marsh, may be applicable to some of those things that the interests include, groundwater protection and, public and private water supply and all that fun stuff that comes with it. But it may not be as applicable to Coastal Bank, but Coastal Bank may be more of a especially in the case of an eroding coastal bank, that increased surface water runoff has the potential of, increasing erosion, which is going to cause an adverse impact for that bank's ability to protect against, storm damage. So tying those impacts and why that makes sense to each one of those, I think, is a little bit of what takes some of the work with these. But I think the concepts are sound enough to be able to do that with a little bit of thought. It doesn't necessarily have to make it into the regulation directly, but I think as long as the discussion that leads up to it kind of addresses those issues in that way, so we stay within the bounds of the act and the bylaw, I think that's the prudent way to go.
Okay. And Jeff, would you recommend then going through those steps at like a next meeting from here?
So I think the way to do it is, we'll try to incorporate the suggestions that we had and the stuff from tonight and some of the other things. I may leave separate from the document for right at the moment till we're a little bit farther. I may leave the land under the ocean piece kind of separate for a bit, because that's kind of a different kind of animal, so to say. But I think the rest could go in for sure. And then having that discussion and kind of establishing why some of those changes are being made. And then I also think that goes with it, right? And I think Seth mentioned it earlier tonight. If you're going to make those changes, and obviously waivers are different, but I also think thinking about performance standards for ways for those structures, even if they're compliant to the buffer zone, to meet the standard and the interest that you're trying to protect. So I think, again, just as a total example and not set in stone, if you were to say that, any structure that you were concerned about, water runoff and water protection or surface water runoff from, if they were required to demonstrate that they could hold and keep all of that water and infiltrate it into the ground through some, natural or engineered means without causing an adverse impact, if you were requiring that to happen and tying it to the interests again and kind of that preamble, I think that's also something that's an important discussion to have, because I think if you tell people they can do it, they need to know how they can do it and what rules go with it. It's just not here you can do it and good luck. It's giving them that guidance, I think, is the important part of all of that. Or if you can't do it in compliance, this is what's required of you to take something that would no longer be a compliant structure and update it to become a compliant structure as best you can in place where it is. Because I think if we, especially with patios, if we move those out of buffer zone, I think over time we're going to see a lot of places that come in for permits that say, well, I already have a patio there and I'm going to demo the house and redo it. Well, that's also a time to bring things into compliance as best you can sometimes, so you don't hear that, well, we already have it, so it's having its impact and we're just going to leave it. Well, no, you can update it to bring it in. It's very similar to septic systems that are functioning septic systems that when the house sells, they have to update it if it's in with one of the nutrient sensitive zones for some of the watersheds. They have to go to IA systems, even though they have the Title V compliant system, because that's the best available technology to minimize the impacts that those properties are having. So I think having that kind of in there too will be important if we're going to make some of the significant changes, it sounds like.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that, Jeff. That's true. And I'm thinking about like building code. A lot of older structures aren't permittable now. So they say, well, don't upgrade your house because then you're going to lose, that structure that you wouldn't be allowed to have anymore. So that would be great to add language that people would have to update and be more compliant.
Yeah, I think it's more, I guess, probably the term I've talked with Rachel from the Land Bank about is our regulations could do a better job enabling people to be successful and managing their properties in the least impactful way. And there's struggles and gives and takes, and the ones that she and I fight about the most usually involve, like viewshed management and things. And, you go out to Squam and everyone has 4-foot high vegetation and it's getting cut. and you're just never there when it is, or something's happening, or you just don't have access to it. But you know what's happening is, you know, the question that I ask is, what tools could we be giving those people to make them more successful? Or how could that be better? You know, because I think we all know in a lot of these cases, if you tell people absolutely no, their response is going to be like, well, good luck catching me. And then you're going to be playing chase with it. Is what tools could we be giving them that are better to say, you don't have to get chased because you can do it in a responsible way that makes sense and is compliant with the rules and how you would do that. And I think that's the next kind of step of our regulations, is to tackle that better than they already do.
Thank you, Jeff. I want to make sure, I know RJ, you're on. If you have any comments or anything you want to add at this point to our regulations, I'm going to give you a chance.
Can you hear me?
Yes, you can.
Wow, I didn't think I was going to make it on. Okay. I just would like to reiterate the comments already submitted by the Land Council. I completely blanked when I submitted the second letter and didn't attach the research papers. I sent them to Jeff yesterday. So hopefully you guys have a chance to look over them. Basically just covering coastal engineering structure definitions, which you guys had already covered. Stair landings, beach stair landings, which I believe you guys have already covered, and salt marshes, which I think have been talked about a little less, but are definitely critical. So I'd just like to make sure that those stay on the docket. Thank you.
Thank you, RJ. Definitely the beach stair landings we've been getting at. I agree. We haven't discussed salt marshes at length, but they would be one of those resource areas that are obviously impacted by sea level rise. So we should look to update our language to protect them better. So we will definitely keep that at the front of our attention. Seth?
If I may, to Jeff. So I have a question related to protected interests. Are those set by the Act and the bylaw, or is there a capacity to add additional protected interests? I know when these were written, some of the coastal resilience and sea level rise and climate change impacts weren't even thought about. So I can think about one or two things that could be helpful to add.
Jeff, do you have
Yeah,
an
so
answer?
the easy answer to that is the interests are not necessarily set. The town has some interests that aren't included within the state act. So there is some ability to add, but I think to do that, we would have to have some pretty clear grounds on why that's an interest that we are trying to add into the interests. I know that's a lot of saying interests, but I do agree. I mean, I think obviously a lot of these regulations never contemplated sea level rise and climate change and some of the resiliency issues that we're seeing. You know, we can definitely look into it. If you have some suggestions, Seth, if you email it to me, I can kind of kick the tires on them specifically and see if there are any thoughts to it. But I know, like, you know, recreation is something that's there. I know prevention of pollution's kind of come in and out a few times, and sometimes they tie to those. Sometimes it's adding existing interests onto other resource areas that don't have them right now because it makes some sense, just based upon use and kind of activity. So I think a lot of those choices are there.
Thank you for that. And that's a great question, Seth. Any other kind of final thoughts or comments? I guess, Jeff, I should ask, did we have any comments on the YouTube from the public? Okay. So if there's nothing else to add from commissioners, I guess we will continue this matter. Jeff, I know we have some open dates floating around. I don't know if we want to continue tonight or pick a date at another time.
So I was going to say, we kind of tentatively scheduled. Joanne left me this wonderful, like, Post-it note with all of the potential meeting dates we have for all kinds of various things. We obviously have tonight's that are there. The next one that she kind of threw out for discussion here was 4/21 at 4 p.m. I'm kind of wondering, just to kind of keep our feet to the fire a little bit. Let me just bring up my whole calendar. So 4/21 is the Wednesday before our Thursday regular meeting, which is, I never like doing back-to-back meetings, but that's just me personally. I'm almost wondering if it would make some sense to try to shoot to get everybody a draft of all of those changes and put together to review, and then just have a really brief discussion, maybe on the regular meeting on the 22nd, just for people to kind of say that we've received it, we're reviewing it, and then set a more definitive date from there, because there's a lot of changes to get marked up and tracked in, but that would be a good target date. I just don't want to have an unproductive conversation from a draft that we'd be trying to get out in the next 2 weeks. I just want to be sure that we can get it all in there.
Yeah, and I agree. And from a perspective of someone who will be on a school break, then I would love to avoid having 2 meetings.
Yes.
Selfishly.
Back-to-back nights are always super tough too. No one wants to be there the second night, and it just makes it hard.
Yeah.
I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I do too. And then we can get any questions out to you about the draft at the 4/22 meeting, and then have a real in-depth discussion, hopefully shortly after that at another meeting.
Yeah. I just want to make sure, and we also want to make sure there's ample time for the public to review. We don't want anyone to blindside it.
Okay. So I guess since this is a notice, then we'll continue to the date certain, which is April 22nd.
Perfect.
Perfect. All right. That moves us on to other business, approval of minutes. I don't think we have minutes yet. So if anybody has a motion to adjourn, we are there.
So moved. And thank you, Terry. And thanks, Jeff, for starting to pull this all together.
Yes, it's
Well,
so much work.
It's long overdue, and it's something that there's so much stuff coming online with Coastal Resiliency Plan and all of the stuff that
Right.
somehow the stars align and the time just seems to be perfect. So
Great. Thank you.
Mark, are you seconding that?
I am, and I will echo, I think Ian's comment that it will be helpful if possible, Jeff, to have the changes outlined in a new color.
Yep. So I'm going to warn everybody too, for anyone who's not following along or hasn't heard of this, the town is looking to standardize the format of regulations because they're all over the map. So the town has undertaken a project to codify all the regulations. So they'll look a lot like what the town code looks like. So we're also going to be switching to that format, how it looks. So the next time you guys see it, it's not going to look anything like the version we have now. It's going to look like the codified version. So you'll get that first. I'll send you a clean copy of it, and then I will send you one that is track changed with crossouts and blood all over and things that are there for people to look at.
Thank you, Jeff. So we do need to roll vote this motion to adjourn. So Beal,
Aye.
Engelborg,
Aye.
Arisman, aye. Golding,
Aye.
Phillips.
Aye.
Right, that's unanimous. And Jeff, definitely thank you. You've been doing double the work with double the meetings and Joanne out of the office. So you kept us organized.
You owe her something really special when she comes back.
I know.
We're flowers, a dinner at a really nice restaurant, something.
Sounds like a plan.
Just to prove how valued.
Yes, very, very valued. All right. Well, everybody, thank you for working through all this. We've had a lot of meetings in the last 2 weeks, and we've gotten a lot of important work done. So thank you.
Thanks,
Night,
Ashley.
everybody.
Goodbye, everybody.
Yeah, and I just want to say I think it's just been, I really feel like we've accomplished a lot. I mean, like today's meeting was great. And I'm so glad that we're doing this all together. And Jeff, thank you so much for all the background and everything you bring. Really helpful.
I know. I have the easy job because I never have to vote on any of these things. So thank you for the kind words, and hopefully we'll get it done sooner than later.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Good
Night.
night.